Dagdy Agus Falcha. Hi, hello, and welcome. John O'Sullivan Irish Pagan School. And it's that time of year again where I need to remind people that getting drunk is not an expression of your Irish ancestry, heritage, or culture. It's actually an expression of colonial trauma. So, as we approach St. Patrick's Day, I'm going to talk a little bit about him and some of the demystifications as to why he might not be someone you'd want to actually honor in your practices. But before we do that, I'd like to invite you to pick up a year's worth of free teaching from the Irish Pagan School. All you got to do is go to irishpagan.school/free. We have classes, we have blogs, we have recordings of video, we have audio, there's the podcast, there's TikTok, there's YouTube. We have so much content available for you to explore your connection with your ancestry, with Irish kind of culture, with Irish kind of spirituality. In fact, there's actually a specific kind of thing. Actually, here's another great one. Go to irishpagan.school/roots. There's a lovely kind of resource available for you to download there to talk about your ancestry or to explore your connection to Ireland, whether you have biological DNA ancestry or not. So, with that said, yeah, we're approaching a time of year where people decorate the world in green and think that alcoholism to an excessive amount is an expression of being Irish. And yeah, no, not in my name, not in the name of my culture. It is a problem. It really is a problem every time we get to this. And it's not a problem all around the world, it's a problem in Ireland too. And so what we need to kind of look at is, where does the problem come from and why? And sorry, folks, it is post-colonial trauma. Any kind of culture around the world, many cultures around the world, and indigenous cultures share something similar in that they were colonized by another country and therefore end up with similar coping mechanisms, similar unhelpful coping mechanisms, or in some cases, institutionalized control of the population, because if a population is too inebriated to mobilize, to become active, if they're too impoverished or starving to be able to kind of unionize or to be able to stand up or speak for themselves, if they're not educated enough to be able to speak articulately or to know their rights, then they can be dominated. And that is something that was done in all of those capacities to the Irish by our next door neighbors, Great Britain. And it was not done over a short period of time, it was done over centuries, folks. Absolute centuries. And so yeah, it's very frustrating when people think that, oh great, it's that time of year, we've hit March, and this is where I wear some green and I go out and get absolutely blitzed off my face and think that that's an expression or celebration of Irish culture. Sorry, folks, no, it's not. Yes, there is a drink problem, and there has been cultural drink problems in Ireland for generations. But in the same way, First Nation tribes have similar things. Down in Mexico, Southern America tribes dominated by the Spanish, similar kind of cultural things. India dominated by the English as well, similar cultural problems. All of which are, again, part of the human nature of trying to survive in a very hostile environment created by an oppressor. Um, and it's sad. It's very sad. It's very difficult. And so I would encourage people to consider or to reconsider their approach to how they celebrate St. Patrick's Day. But, maybe let's put the alcoholism aside and the cultural colonized trauma aside and talk about St. Patrick himself, the patron saint of Ireland. He's not a good guy. He's absolutely not a good guy. And we actually have a class available at the Irish Pagan School on St. Patrick. It's actually a really great dialogue between Morgan Daimler and Laura O'Brien, and I would recommend it as kind of a true exploration of the individual who is Patrick, because St. Patrick's a propaganda piece. There was previous bishops who were allocated by the Pope at the time, or various popes, to bring Christianity to the barbarian Irish, or the Scotty tribes as it was listed, or like the Celt tribes in Ireland. Like, there's been multiple different times, and the only reason that Patrick had any kind of success was that Patrick could speak the language. And the only reason that Patrick could speak the language was because he had been in Ireland previously as an indentured individual. And there's a fascinating thing in the Irish law tracks that we can see about tribes and the ancient tribal nature of Ireland, in that everything was associated around your tua or your tribe, and not just your family, not just your your ruling people, those who kind of ruled down you, your chieftains. It was actually your physical territory as well, the land in which you lived. And as long as you remained within the tribal land of your tua, you were fine. If you were of a particular tua and found outside of your tribal land, you could be taken as property. You could be taken and then sold back as a hostage. You could be then taken and, taken advantage of, or then used or harmed without kind of recompense. And so there was a number of different kind of levels in the ancient Irish society. But again, depending on class, there were some people who could go outside of their tribal lands and expect to be protected. The bards, for example, or fillers, Brehons, druids, all of those people could roam around. True, they were referred to specifically as Sir Nemet. That was the class of society in which they existed, which were like the free class, in that they could go and travel anywhere on the island without expecting to be kind of put upon. So why is this important? Why am I mentioning this? How does this connect to Patrick? Well, one of the rules that we have in the law tranks talk about being cast out from your tribe, cast out from your tua. If you have committed such like terrible kind of practices, you've been found guilty of a crime by a Brehon, you may be cast out of your tribal lands, and you may even be cast out of Ireland. And what would happen was they would put you on a boat and they'd shove you off the coast. Now, the currents around Ireland are very fantastic, and most of the stuff that gets pushed off the coast comes back onto the island somewhere. But anyone found in a boat washed up on the shores of Ireland is a person of no tribe, a person of no people, and a person in very limited sense at all. And that is the story of Patrick. So he was from Wales, and he actually came up, washed up on the island, which means he has zero status. He had no tribe, no recognition within the legal structure, and so he was taken in as a property and he was put to work. But in order to make him more effective in the work he could do, he was taught how to speak a proper language, which was our language, the Irish language. And so that carried on. Eventually, he did manage to escape. He fled. He managed to get back to Wales, and I think from there, he went into the priestly kind of work. And then it was found out that there was this guy serving in the Christian church who could speak the language of the barbarians, and that's why he was elevated and then sent back to Ireland as a bishop for the colonization or the missionary work of converting the people to the one true way, the one true God. Um, and then we have all of these stories about like Patrick roaming around the island, many of which are actually probably attributed to his predecessor Palladius, who was actually here before him. But Patrick was not the greatest of guys, and there's so many stories of him performing miracles and performing feats. One I always like to remind people of is the story of St. Etna and Fidelma. So in the Rathclonnan complex over on the west of Ireland, just outside Roscommon in a place called Tulsk, there is a triple spring known as Ogala Well. And so this is said to have been a place connected with Cashel Monaghan, the Druid school up the hill. And the story was that one day two druidesses from the school, St. Etna and Fidelma, were down in the triple spring washing themselves, and along came Patrick with his bunch of lads following him, and they decided to hide in the bushes and watch these women wash themselves. And then they were spotted, and the women were like, "Hey, what are you doing here?" And then Patrick steps forward, "I'm preaching the one true God," and begins the whole kind of performative element of instructing people of this island how they were wrong in their spirituality. They did not know true spirituality, that there was only one God. And these two women, curious students as they were like, well, we have many gods. We've many gods all around us, connecting in the land and the water. And they describe their faith. At which point Patrick says, well, no, there's one God who's above all of that. And he's up in the sky. And they're like, well, how can we see your God? Like, our God is in everywhere around us. That's our beliefs and our spirituality. And he says, you need to be baptized to experience God. And these two women decide, yeah, we want to figure this out. We want to know. We want to learn, because they're students. And so Patrick is said to have performed the baptism on them both in Ogala Well, and they perceived God for the first time and were instantly raptured and taken to heaven. And then they became known as Saint Etna and Saint Fidelma, which are still recognized in those areas as local patron saints. And, the churches in their area are named after Saint Etna and Saint Fidelma. It's a great story, right? About a bunch of lads coming along, finding two young women in Springs and then being instantly raptured by experiencing the visions of God. If I was in any way cynical or skeptical about things, I might really have a question about that. But time and again, as Patrick is roaming around the island, performing all these miracles, performing all these feats, the language is undermining the culture that exists on the island. There's this very famous prayer referred to as St. Patrick's Breastplate, and whole sections of that are takedowns of the power structures of Ireland at the time. Cursings or prayers against the smith, or prayers for the protection against a sharp-tongued woman. Both are attributed to St. Patrick on his breastplate, which was supposed to be the prayers that protected him from the trials and tribulations of converting the barbarian Irish. So, yeah, if you are choosing to honor St. Patrick on St. Patrick's Day, if you're choosing to recognize St. Patrick on St. Patrick's Day, it might be worth taking a bit of time to understand where you're coming from, where he's coming from, the mythology and the information about him. And for me, I don't acknowledge Patrick as the patron saint of Ireland at all. Like, I am a lapsed Christian. I actually prefer myself to as pagan, but I was raised in the Catholic religion and I understand all about it. And I never vibed with Patrick at all. I always had some kind of that doesn't seem right approach to him and his stories and the casting out snakes. By the way, the snakes weren't, you know, druids or pagans. Like, the end of pagan Ireland was very much on the way at the time, and Patrick is not the one who got rid of that. Like, the druids continued for many years, which is why there were so many prohibitions in all of his prayers to protect against it. He was actually, there's another section of prayer where he kind of bans bards from performing any form of divinatory poetry. They're allowed to kind of have memory poetry. They're allowed to have like praise poetry, satire poetry, but not so much. But they're not allowed to perform any poetry based on divination. And Patrick is attributed with undermining and destroying that power that was inherently within our culture. So, yeah, Patrick, not a fan. Would recommend you learn more about it. There's one last thing I wanted to maybe share, and it is from the ancient Irish law tracts, and I'm going to loop back to that alcohol kind of side of stuff. It's not about abstaining. It's not about a prohibition, or it's not about a blanket ban, But if your approach to celebrating your Irish ancestry or culture is to engage in alcoholism to the excess, then you're not actually engaging in your ancestral culture of Ireland. So I'd like to offer you a solution. I'd like to offer you an alternative, because we know from the law tracts, the ancient Irish law tracts, that there was a very specific structure of hospitality in Ireland. And hospitality was core. It was central to these tribes being able to come together, being able to understand each other, and then being able to provide safe space in between tribes for those who did need to travel. And so there's a piece of the law that does state about the obligation of a host to provide food and drink for their guests, and it stipulates that a free man can expect no more than 6 pints when they visit, under the laws of hospitality. And so it wasn't even down to someone comes in, you have to offer them hospitality, food and drink, you protect them, they sleep in your home, you look after them, which was core to being able to make sure that our society, our ancient society, continued. But there was also an onus and an obligation on the guest to act with honor, to act in justice. There was no kind of like conflict within a brewer, for example. A brewer was a separate kind of structure of ancient Irish society. Those who were the wealthiest of the farming caste had an obligation. If someone turned up at their door, they had to bring them in. They had to treat them like family, feed them, drink them, take care of them. But then the law also says that no free man can expect more than 6 pints. And that was to make sure that there was balance, that someone coming in aren't taking advantage or abuse of the hospitality. So, as ever, with a lot of things in life, revel, enjoy, experience the things that you love in your life. And yeah, maybe do it in moderation though. Maybe kind of set expectations in a bit more honest and a bit more open way. And if you are going to be vocal about your expressions of your Irish heritage or your culture, maybe try and dig a little bit deeper. Go to that irishpagan.school/roots if you have Ancestry. If you want to know more, irishpagan.school patricks.school/free. You know, there is so much that we want to be able to help people. We're not saying you can't be Irish. We're not saying you can't connect. You're not saying anything like that at all. We're saying that if you are going to approach this, do it from a place of being informed, do it from a place of being considerate, doing it from a place of acknowledging the original nature of the culture that is there and honoring and appreciating that, not appropriating and taking advantage of that. So with that said, Gaurav Mahagat, thank you very much. I really appreciate you joining me for this chat. Look after yourself. And until next time, Slán. Goodbye.